Although Spider-Man the Animated Series ended after 5 seasons, there was much more that happened after that. For instance, writer, producer, and story editor John Semper Jr. had ideas for a 6th season, including a treatment that would have taken care of Season 5's cliffhanger. Then there is a recent comic book that basically serves as an official follow-up to the animated show. And in this video, I'm gonna explore all that and more. So much more. I usually don't say it, but for this one, you gotta stay till the very end. And trust me, you'll not regret it. So without further ado, let's begin.
I have to remember that my enemy here is me. Maybe I shouldn't be trying to defeat him.
What was the animated series all about? For millions of us 90s kids, Spider-Man the Animated Series was the ultimate Spider-Man show ever. And that's despite the fact that the actual Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon ran for 104 episodes, and Spider-Man the Animated Series ran for a total of 65 episodes. Now, as some of you may already know, Spider-Man TAS came on the heels of X-Men the Animated Series, and ran on Fox Kids from 1994 through 1998. With reruns and later availability keeping it alive for years after that. And over those 5 seasons, we saw Peter Parker deal with multiple problems, some around his own life and some around the villains who tried to make his life hell. But the kid never gave up. He almost always had an answer to the problems that life threw at him. But I think the most interesting part about Spider-Man's life was how he juggled his life as Peter Parker. That soap about his personal issues was way more interesting than his villains or how he defeated those villains, cause let's face it, his rogues gallery was almost always replaceable. The way he fought Hydra Man would not have been much different from how he would have fought Sandman. If Sandman had managed to appear in the series, which he did not because James Cameron's unmade Spider-Man movie had tied up certain character plans at the time, although that movie never really saw the light of day. Apart from his rogues gallery, Spidey had his college life, the work at the Daily Bugle, Mary Jane, Felicia Hardy, then he had his friend Harry, and of course his support system, his Aunt May. But that's not all. We even got X-Men team-ups and a premature Spider-Verse style multi-dimensional crossover. But all good things come to an end, and so did Spider-Man the Animated Series in early 1998. But the problem here is that the show did not give us a completely conclusive finale. It felt like the final episode was a huge finale and a cliffhanger at the same time, with Spider-Man flying off with Madame Web into the multiverse to find the real Mary Jane Watson, as the Mary Jane he had married turned out to be a clone. But then we never saw him come back in the show itself. So what happened? Why did the show end this way? Was it cancelled? Was a Season 6 ever planned? Did Peter ever rescue Mary Jane in the end? Let's break it all down from the very beginning of the series to the latest episode so we leave no web unspun. The 90s Spider-Man cartoon began as Marvel's answer to Batman and X-Men, a fresh cartoon for a new era. In the early 90s, Marvel saw how Batman the Animated Series redefined superhero cartoons, plus Fox Kids had struck gold with X-Men. And like any self-respecting competitor facing bankruptcy, Marvel got jealous and wanted to recreate the magic that Batman the Animated Series and X-Men the Animated Series had created. So the execs at Marvel decided they needed their own definitive animation showcase. And that's how Spider-Man's animated show was conceived. And the man who would be the brains behind it all was going to be John Semper Jr. Thankfully, Fox and Marvel let Semper do his thing and allowed him to dive as far deep as he wanted into decades of Spider lore. In fact, Semper actually demanded a ton of Spider-Man comics to ensure that the show would draw from classic stories. But no, he did not outright copy them, he just borrowed the essence from those stories. Like in an interview with Marvel Animation Age when asked how important it was to stay faithful to comics, this is what Semper had to say. It's only important to maintain the essence of the comics, but not the actual stories, because the actual stories are very badly constructed and mostly useless. If you try to translate it directly to the screen, it doesn't work. So what you try to do as an animation writer is to grasp the essence of what makes the comic book story interesting, and then you try to mold it into a narrative that actually functions for TV. And I could not agree more. I mean, you gotta agree that some of the comics are very disjointed, but more on this later. For now, we can be sure that what Semper set out to achieve, he did, and in all honesty, watching the Spider-Man cartoon felt like I was reading the 60s or the 70s comics, which is how Spider-Man managed to become as great as the Batman and X-Men cartoon, if not greater.
The people love me. No wonder my armored alter ego is so arrogant.
What all was Spider-Man the Animated Series based on? As I just explained, the series of course used Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's Marvel Comics and their characters as the foundation, but nothing was copied panel by panel. John Semper Jr. took years and years of Spider-Man history and transformed it into longer, chapter-style arcs, which basically helped a ton in making the series feel wholesome, organic, and organized. So yeah, if you read the comics, you might feel like you are seeing a familiar silhouette, but the stuff inside is totally different. For instance, Season 1 had the Alien Costume Saga, which focused on Spider-Man and Venom, and that arc was loosely based on Web of Spider-Man #1, The Amazing Spider-Man, and other comic material. The dream sequence from Part 1 of Alien Costume, where Spider-Man's red and blue costume and the black costume fight for control over Peter, draws from The Amazing Spider-Man #258, the story called The Sinister Secret of Spider-Man's New Costume. The second episode of Alien Costume has Spidey using a bell and its chime to get rid of the symbiote. That was adapted from the story Till Death Do Us Part from Web of Spider-Man #1. There's more. So at the beginning of the Alien Costume Part 3, we have Eddie Brock and his wall of newspaper clippings all dedicated to the friendly neighborhood superhero. But then he ultimately becomes Venom and swears vengeance on Spider-Man. Now that was adapted in spirit from Eddie Brock's early Venom build-up in the comics, including The Amazing Spider-Man #298 and later issues. In the same episode, Eddie messes with Peter at Aunt May's place, and that was picked up from the Sand and the Fury story arc from The Amazing Spider-Man #317. Now, I can go on and on about it, but that would probably elongate this video to a 5-hour one, and for such longer sagas, you should check out the Marvelous Long Reads YouTube channel. But one thing that's for sure is that even specific episodes of Spider-Man the Animated Series had multiple comic book issues as sources of inspiration, and that's the beauty of the series. That's the amount of hard work it took for people to create that beautiful series, which brings me to my next topic.
Ticket, please. Sorry, big guy.
Why did this cartoon feel like one giant Spider-Man saga? Unlike several other Saturday morning cartoons from that period, the unique thing about Spider-Man the Animated Series was that everything was connected. The serialized story, something where each episode felt like a part of something bigger, well, it was not being done by many cartoons, and the obvious exceptions were X-Men the Animated Series and Batman the Animated Series. And maybe that's why Spider-Man also preferred serialized arcs for himself over the tried and tested, but very predictable, villain of the week formulas, which is why most of the early episodes from this show set up longer stories. Season 1 was definitely more episodic, and that's because Semper did not have the same level of control over the show's storyline back then. Like in his interview with Marvel Animation Age, he was asked why the first season was more of a villain of the week show rather than the season-long arcs that came later, and this is what he had to say. "I always prefer story arcs, and I think individual half-hour stories are dull and predictable. I originally had planned a season-long story arc for Season 1, but I was prohibited from doing it because others had agendas that needed to be served first. And so, in Season 1, I was limited in the things that I could do. When Season 2 began, I had total control over the storylines. But even in Season 1, the show planted things for later. We met Eddie Brock before he became Venom, Norman Osborn before the Green Goblin took over his life, the Smythes before Alistair posed bigger problems, and Kingpin before he was shown as the mastermind behind so many issues that plagued the city. Season 2 then made this structure much clearer with Neogenic Nightmare. Peter's powers began to fail because of his mutation, and it became the single thread that tied all the episodes together. The Insidious Six, Morbius, Blade, all these characters were somehow connected to Peter, and the whole thing kept circling back to Peter's body basically turning against him. Later in the third season, the Sins of the Fathers arc made everything more personal for Peter, because now Norman and Harry Osborn were getting the limelight, and we all know about Harry's relationship with Peter. But more importantly, this was the season where Peter lost Mary Jane after the Green Goblin found out Spider-Man's true identity, and this disappearance of Mary Jane was followed up at the end of the final season. Then there were Secret Wars and Spider Wars, etc., but the bottom line is that all 65 episodes did have some influence on one another. There was always some degree of overlap. The Fate of Mary Jane, the mystery that broke 90s kids. Now, much like so many of the major events and tragedies in the series, the whole Mary Jane mystery in Spider-Man the Animated Series also owed its inception to one of the most famous and tragic moments in Spider-Man comics. Back in 1973, Gwen Stacy, Peter Parker's girlfriend, was killed during the Green Goblin story in The Amazing Spider-Man number 121. And that story became one of the toughest things that Spidey had to face. So when Mr. Semper Jr. was working on the third season finale called Turning Point, it made sense to him to use the emotional shape of the Gwen Stacy tragedy. But there was one problem. No, wait, actually there were many problems. The cartoon, firstly, did not really have Gwen Stacy as part of its main world, and she only appeared much later as a version from another dimension in the final episode. But yeah, safe to say that for the main series, she could not be used. So the show replaced Gwen Stacy with Mary Jane, as in she was going to be the one to suffer that fate. And as some of you may remember, MJ was Peter's love interest at the time. So Green Goblin kidnapped her and took her to a bridge, only to use her to draw Spider-Man out. And Gwen dies in the comics, like comics could do that and kill people. But the problem that the animated series had to face was that the 90s Spider-Man cartoon had to work under some heavy broadcast standards. Spider-Man avoided realistic punching, realistic guns were heavily limited, and works like Kill, Die, Death, and even Sinister were heavily restricted or avoided. So obviously, the show simply could not kill Mary Jane like the comics did Gwen Stacy. So MJ, instead of actually dying, well, she falls from a bridge and Spider-Man believes that she is gone, or at least that there was no way of finding her. But the thing is, she fell into a portal which vanished after she entered it, and her actual fate was left as this horrible cliffhanger. So much so that the animated series never resolved it on screen before the series ended. And just like that, the real Mary Jane was gone from the show. After this, the series still had 2 packed seasons, and somehow MJ returned. After this, Peter eventually revealed his secret to Mary Jane and even married her, but this Mary Jane was not the real one. She was a clone who had all of Mary Jane's memories up to the time the real Mary Jane fell from the bridge. So much so that the clone believed she was Mary Jane, felt like Mary Jane, and also loved Peter like Mary Jane. But because she was a clone created through Miles Warren's experiments and tied to Hydra Man's unstable water-based cloning material, she eventually broke down at the end, or dissolved, or whatever it is with respect to water clone people. But in the series finale, Madam Web tells him that she would help him search for the real Mary Jane. She sounded like she had some idea where Mary Jane was, and she sounded like that because Semper had some ideas. And in an interview, this is what he had to say about bringing her back. "I always intended to bring the real MJ back. But now, nearly 30 years later, Marvel Comics continued this animated universe with the 5-issue limited series called Spider-Man 94. Which was promoted as a follow-up to the show's cliffhanger. But more on this later, rest assured. I will explore the comic book and MJ's fate. But I must note here that Peter and Mary Jane did appear together in a cameo during X-Men 97 Season 1, although that cameo does not explain how Peter found her. For now, let's explore the final moments of the 65th episode and check out how exactly the final episode panned out.
Real Spider-Man. The real Peter Parker. Guess again.
How did Spider-Man the Animated Series actually end? Now, Spider-Man the Animated Series ended with the Spider-Wars arc, and for a 90s cartoon that had spent years dodging all those criminally stiff broadcast rules, laser guns, and the word death, the finale did something that few others had done on television at that time. The last chapter of this 5-season saga was the 2-part story Spider-Wars, with the final episodes called Spider-Wars Chapter 1, I Really, Really Hate Clones, and Spider-Wars Chapter 2, Farewell, Spider-Man. Now, today, everyone knows the Spider-Verse because of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man No Way Home, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And the concept of having several Spider-Men and Spider-Women from different realities has now become a mainstream thing. But the question you must ask yourself is, who helped popularize this concept on screen? Where did many modern viewers first experience it? Well, the Spider-Wars saga brought several Spider-Men together against an interdimensional evil version of Spider-Man, and in that sense, Spider-Wars was an early animated version of what later audiences would call Spider-Verse storytelling. The arc was placed right after the Spider-Man animated Secret Wars storyline, a trilogy, if you must know. And in that storyline, Spider-Man had been pulled into an experiment by the Beyonder, who, as some of you may know, is basically an almost all-powerful cosmic being who wanted to test whether good had greater force in the universe or if it was evil. So Spider-Man had gathered a group of heroes and fought through what can only be described as a grand trial. After he defeated a godlike version of Dr. Doom, the Beyonder revealed that the real reason behind his elaborate shenanigans was to see if Spider-Man was worthy of saving the universe, should such a moment arrive. I mean, from Peter's perspective, this was pretty wild. Like, one second, he was probably worrying about his rent, and the next one plunged him into figuring out whether he can be the savior of the entire universe. The cause of worry was another version of Peter Parker, who had bonded with the Carnage symbiote and had gone mad with power. The version became the very aptly named Spider-Carnage, and he planned to destroy all reality. And in order to stop him, the main Spider-Man got help from numerous alternate versions of himself from other worlds and realities. There was a Spider-Man who was actually a famous actor in his universe, but the dude had like little to no battle experience and was more of a liability than an asset. Then there was another Spider-Man who wore the silver and black armor from the 90s comics, and another who wore the costume of Ben Reilly, better known as the Scarlet Spider and the clone of Peter Parker. Although it's futile to name each of these Spider-Men individually, it is safe to say that this was where the arc had its fun, because these were not all the same Peter Parker in different clothing. All of them had their own histories, personalities, and powers. But then again, each of these Peter Parkers understood their role as Spider-Man in the universe, and the lesson that with great power came great responsibility. In fact, even Spider-Carnage, despite how vile and twisted he had become, he still had some pieces of Peter Parker left inside of him, albeit buried under all that madness. Now, our main Spider-Man understood that he could not beat Spider-Carnage only through force, so he took him to a universe where Uncle Ben had never died. This was a very intelligent trick because it attacked Spider-Carnage emotionally rather than physically, and it worked as well. Mostly because Uncle Ben was the one person who could reach the Peter inside Spider-Carnage. Ben talked to him and reminded him of who he had been, and Spider-Carnage finally backed away from his plan. But he could not fully escape what he had become, so he leapt into a portal with the weapon he had planned to use against reality. And then Spider-Man returned the actor version of himself to his own universe, which is where he met Stan Lee. Like our very own Stan Lee. The episode generously showed us Spider-Man swinging through New York with the man who helped create him. And yeah, for the longtime fans, there could be no greater service, at least up until that time. In fact, Stan's wife Joan Lee was also a part of the series, because she had voiced Madam Web. Stan Lee later had another Spider-Man multiverse moment in Into the Spider-Verse, where he played a costume shop clerk named Stan. When Miles Morales asked whether he could return the costume, Stan told him that it always fit eventually. And if you think about it, it was pretty apt, in the sense that every person who wore the mask had to grow into it in their own way, and that was true for Miles as well, for the animated Peter Parker, and for every other Spider-Person who came after. Finally, after saving the multiverse, Spider-Man was ready to go find Mary Jane, his long-lost love, who was taken from him in Season 3. And to his great fortune, Madam Web promises him that she will help him find the real MJ, who's been stuck in another dimension. And the very last shot of the series is Spider-Man swinging off with Madam Web into the unknown to continue that search. Interestingly, the show ends on screen with them heading off on their journey to find MJ, which only means that the series ended in the middle of a quest. Now, in X-Men 97, we do see Peter and MJ reunited, but the show does not pause to explain whether this reunion happened exactly through the old planned story or through something else. Either way, this brings me to my next point. Was the show ended properly or cancelled? This is a bit of a curious and complicated question to answer, mostly because the show's ending was like Schrodinger's cat. It did end and it did not end, but it all depends on your perspective instead of any radioactive material. So officially speaking, the series aired up until a finale, and all 65 episodes were broadcast, while the last one was called Farewell Spider-Man, and that sounds like farewell enough. I mean, what else could you possibly name the final episode of a Spider-Man cartoon, if not that? So looking at these arguments, it feels like Spider-Man the Animated Series had run its full course. Furthermore, it is also a fact that 65 episodes was a common target for animation syndication runs back then, so Fox could treat the show as having completed its run. As John Semper has said in later comments, he does not view Spider-Man as a normal cancellation in the way fans often imagine, because it reached that 65 episode endpoint. So we can absolutely say that, from one angle, The 5th season's ending was the official conclusion. But let me play the devil's advocate for a minute. You see, Semper and others have also confirmed that he had ideas for another season, a 6th season. In 1997, Semper said Fox didn't want to continue Spider-Man because Fox was consolidating Marvel work under Saban. He said if they were to pick up Spider-Man for more episodes, they'd probably have to do so under an existing contract that would include Saban, so they just won't continue the series. Basically, business issues and company politics got in the way of new episodes. There have also been stories according to which Fox's Ted and Avi Arad had personality clashes, but Semper has pushed back against the idea that this was the simple reason the show ended. The safer version is that the show completed its 65-episode run, while any further continuation was blocked by business and financial reality. But as I said, there really were proposed 6th season ideas. So why don't we quickly talk about those too?
Take care of yourself.
You too, Spider-Man! Farewell and good luck!
The Lost Season 6 and the Peter Finds Mary Jane story. Now, the proposed 6th season would have had a lot of things going on, like we would have found out that Jack the Ripper was actually Carnage, then there would have been possible guest appearances by other heroes like the Hulk. We'd have gotten to see Richard Fisk appearing as the masked supervillain named The Rose, the villain named Puma would have appeared, and even Jack-O-Lantern and others. But I think the most fascinating of these was the treatment script for the Peter Finds Mary Jane arc, which had a teaser and a multi-act structure. Semper revealed it a few years ago to people who donated to his 2016 War of the Rocket Men crowd campaign, and I think it's a fair idea to explore it. The story treatment by Semper would have closed some of the wounds left open after Spider-Wars Part 2 Farewell Spider-Man, where Madame Web promised to help Peter find the real Mary Jane. The story started with Spider-Man clutching Madame Web's chair while both of them traveled through a vortex of time and space. They were after Mary Jane, and up ahead they saw a dark figure. Of course, that figure turned out to be MJ, and Spider-Man tried to reach her, but the vortex messed with his webbing, and then a bolt of electricity hurled him and Madame Web toward the center of the vortex. They fell into another reality, and the impact damaged Madame Web's chair, and because of this, her connection to that reality got severed, and she faded away, which left Spider-Man alone in a strange dimension, with the search for Mary Jane now fully on his shoulders. In Act 1, Spider-Man placed a spider tracer on Madame Web's damaged chair and went out to explore this new world. He found a train and hoped for a second that he had landed back in New York City, but while he rode on top of it, he saw Big Ben and immediately figured that he was now in London. Peter would then learn from newspapers that Jack the Ripper was active during this time, and there was also a headline about Professor Challenger's expedition to find the lost world. It wasn't long before Spider-Man heard a scream while he moved from rooftop to rooftop, and when he rushed down to help, he found that Jack the Ripper was actually Carnage. Spider-Man fought Carnage, but Carnage cut a gas light and destroyed both of Spider-Man's web shooters. Then he used the gas leak to start a fire and fled. Spider-Man bent the gas light shut with his strength, but the gathered crowd thought he was Jack the Ripper and turned on him. In Act 2, Peter borrowed clothes from a shop so he could blend in as Peter Parker. Meanwhile, Mary Jane fell out of the vortex and almost got hit by a cab. And that cab had this dimension's J. Jonah Jameson and Flash Thompson, who had come from New York for the Jack the Ripper story. MJ had no memory, and two streetwalkers named Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes found her and offered help. Elsewhere, Peter spotted the Green Goblin and assumed Norman Osborn had also arrived here after their last battle. He attacked, and the fight took them into a circus, where Spider-Man also faced Mysterio. In Act 3, Spider-Man saw through Mysterio's tricks and stopped him, but then he learned that this was not his Mysterio and not his Green Goblin either, and that these two belonged to this reality, the one he was currently present in. Green Goblin was Harry Osborn and Mysterio was Beck. Together they ran Mysterio's Carnival of Mysteries and Illusions. Harry and Beck offered Peter food, a place to sleep, and help with his web shooters. In return, Peter would give them credit for help in the capture of Jack the Ripper, which could make their circus famous. Beck then took Peter and Harry to a friend who had the parts they needed, and Peter was stunned when that friend turned out to be H.G. Wells, the famed writer considered to be the father of science fiction. Inside Wells' home, Peter's spider sense warned him, and he found a machine nearby. He figured out that Wells had built a time machine, and that the machine must have pulled him, Madame Web, Carnage, and Mary Jane into this reality. Peter then used his spider tracer to lead Wells, Harry, and Beck back to Madame Web's chair, and he convinced Wells to repair it. After that, Peter decided to visit 221B Baker Street because if you were lost in a strange London full of fiction made real, you might as well ask Sherlock Holmes for help. In Act 4, Holmes studied the situation and concluded that Mary Jane's foreign clothes would draw the least attention in Whitechapel. Peter thanked him and left, but Holmes noticed mud, red paint, and tar on Peter's shoe, then realized Peter had climbed a nearby wall. So Holmes and Watson followed him. Meanwhile, Mary Jane returned to the spot where she had fallen from the vortex, hoping someone would come for her. She met Flash, and seeing him stirred something in her memory, though he did not know her. Flash and Jameson split up to hunt Jack the Ripper, while Elizabeth and Catherine misunderstood MJ's situation and left her alone with Flash. Then a scream led MJ and Flash to Elizabeth's body, and Carnage also killed Catherine. Carnage recognized Mary Jane from the time before he had been born from Venom, and that helped MJ remember too. Spider-Man arrived, knocked Carnage away with webbing, removed his mask, and revealed to Mary Jane that he was Peter. They kissed, but Carnage ruined the reunion and escaped with MJ. In Act 5, Carnage did not get far because Mysterio attacked him with illusion. Jameson arrived and shot Mysterio in the arm because he wanted the Whitechapel murders to end. Holmes came in and disarmed Jameson and explained that Mysterio and Spider-Man were trying to stop the real killer. Spider-Man then webbed up Jameson and went after Carnage, and he guessed that Carnage would take Mary Jane to Tower Bridge to recreate the moment where he last saw her, and he was right. Carnage threw MJ from the bridge, but this universe's Green Goblin saved her, attacked Carnage with pumpkin bombs, and then left the rest to Spider-Man after his bombs ran out. In Act 6, Spider-Man lured Carnage to Big Ben because he remembered that the clock's sound could separate a symbiote from its host. The plan worked, but before Spider-Man could capture Cassidy jumped because he did not want life without the symbiote. Peter then collected the camera he had placed earlier so Harry and Beck could use the photos to prove they helped stop Jack the Ripper and boost their circus. Peter and MJ returned to Wells, who believed he had repaired Madame Web's chair, but Carnage came back and grabbed MJ with a blade-like tendril at her throat. He tried to use the chair to kill across other dimensions, but its safeguard only allowed Madame Web to control it. The chair tore Carnage apart and sent his pieces into limbo, while Mary Jane escaped by a very thin margin, and Madame Web returned. Madame Web then sent Mary Jane home and took Spider-Man to No Place, where she revealed spider heroes from other dimensions, including Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen, and Lady Spider. She spoke to Peter about why Spider-Man was so important to the universe and reminded him that with great power came great responsibility. After that, Peter returned to New York City on Earth 92131, and told Bruce, the gargoyle, that he accepted life as Spider-Man. The story ended with Spider-Man back in New York as he web-swung through the city. And honestly, after everything this version of Peter had been through, that ending felt like the closure the cartoon never got to give him.
Superpower size kid, know you want a neighbor like me.
What came next after the cartoon ended? After 1998, Fox did launch Spider-Man Unlimited in 1999. But that was a separate continuity. Like it was an alternate Earth and it had an absolutely different tone. But Unlimited lasted only for one season. Meanwhile, Marvel kept making Spider-Man cartoons, so we had the likes of The Spectacular Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, Marvel's Spider-Man from 2017, and Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. And none of these continued the 1994 cartoon story. But yeah, Ultimate Spider-Man became the longest Spidey show with a total of 104 episodes. Now, I know that everyone is well aware of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, the one with Andrew Garfield too, and then there's the Spider-Verse movies, and of course, the MCU one starring Tom Holland. So there's really no point getting into the detail. However, the biggest update for fans of the original series came from comics. You see, Marvel announced Spider-Man 94, a limited series by J.M. DeMatteis and artist Jim Tao, also credited by Marvel as James Tao. The story officially returned to the animated series universe and picked up after the Season 5 cliffhanger, though it should be noted that John Semper was not the writer of this new comic continuation. The official synopsis said, "After searching to the ends of the multiverse, Peter Parker swings back into the streets of New York with his beloved Mary Jane Watson in tow." So yes, in this comic, Peter has found MJ and they return home. So why don't we check out that comic, yeah? At least the first issue, and if you like it well enough, we'll go ahead and make a separate video on the entire 5-issue miniseries. Spider-Man 94, the real follow-up fans waited decades for. So Spider-Man 94 #1 began with Morlun, the being who feeds on spider totems, which basically meant people like Spider-Man or the multiple Spider-Man and Spider-Women, and Spider-Animals and Spider-Whatnot from the various corners of the multiverse. And at the very beginning of the comic book, it was revealed that Morlun was not in his best physical form. He had been inside a cocoon where his body had been able to repair itself, and he spoke telepathically to Cain, his so-called son, who had been made in Morlun's own likeness. But let's just say Morlun was not going to win any Father's Day award or gifts because he was a piece of shit, to put it mildly. Anyway, Morlun tells Cain that his hunger has begun to rise, and along with that hunger, his anger has also become worse. Cain promised that he would find Spider-Man and bring him back as food for his father, which at least made Cain's mission pretty darn simple. Find Spider-Man, drag him back, and serve him to Dad. Meanwhile, the comic caught us up on Peter and Mary Jane. We learned that Peter and MJ had been married for a while now, but their joy kinda got spoilt when Mary Jane died in Peter's arms during their honeymoon. But of course, there was a twist, and it was revealed that this Mary Jane was not the real one. She had been a clone, while the real MJ had been trapped in a time and space vortex. Peter later spent a lot of time and effort to get the real Mary Jane back, but the comic did not reveal the entire rescue story here. Instead, it promised that those hardships would be explained later in Spider-Man 94. Or at least, that's what the first issue teases. The important thing is that the new comic starts after the rescue, rather than adapting Semper's old Peter finds Mary Jane treatment scene by scene. Nevertheless, the comic book is worth exploring more. So Cain eventually found Spider-Man, but he did not attack him immediately. Like, he simply stayed at a distance and studied him for as long as he could. And while this happened, the story moved to Ezekiel Sims. Now, if you do not know Sims, he was a wealthy businessman who had gained spider-like powers through ritual means when he was young. He later became an ally of spider people, and his main purpose had been to protect them from Morlun. To do that, he had even built underground bunkers with proper facilities and protection for any spider being who might need shelter if Morlun came after them. In some comics, he even offered one of those safe places to Peter himself. Here, though, things were not quite normal with Sim. So we saw him on a video call during a board meeting, where he is about to reveal some major new technology, but then his feed is cut off. After that, the comic takes us to a basement parking lot that had been turned into a shelter for Morlun's recovery. And this was where things became more suspicious. Morlun now looked like Ezekiel Sims, and he also had an AI double in Sims' image. And that AI version had been the one who spoke to the board, not Sims himself. We did not get all the answers about how this happened, but clearly there was a whole mess behind this setup. Morlun told Cain that his returning consciousness had started to interfere with the AI double, and Cain, being the loyal son/slave that he was, cared only about Morlun's body and said the fake Sims could be restarted later. We also learned that Morlun had been inside this particular cocoon for 6 months, which suggests that this was not the first time he had gone into this kind of repair cycle. The evil father figure then asked whether Cain had found Spider-Man, and Cain said yes, but Morlun made it clear that this spider totem, that's our Spidey, was not like the others he had consumed. In his view, Peter was special, and if Morlun consumed him, the power could keep him strong for at least 100 years. But Morlun did not yet have Spider-Man, and he was getting exceedingly hungry, starving. Cain had been serving him in any way he could and brought his dad a human, more specifically Vermin, a vile creature who was somewhere between man and beast, and who himself fed on human flesh. Morlun was so weak that Cain had to carry him, but he was still confident that he could drain Vermin and sustain himself for a few more days until Spider-Man could be procured. Cain released Vermin on Morlun's order, and Vermin charged at him with full force, ready to eat him. But of course, the spider totem-eating vampire was gonna win. He placed both hands on Vermin's face in this almost intimate pose, except obviously there was nothing warm about it, and the next thing we know, Morlun absorbed him. After that, we are returned to Spider-Man, who was dealing with Molten Man during a robbery. And as usual, Peter managed to stop him without much trouble, because Molten Man had tried this sort of thing before, and had lost before too. But this time, Peter felt that someone had been watching him from afar. The strange part was that his spider sense did not warn him. Whoever had kept eyes on him had been careful enough to avoid setting it off. Peter felt unsettled, but he headed home. Then, at Peter's house, Aunt May, Anna Watson, Mary Jane, and Peter were together. And then Cain attacked. He broke through the window and entered their home, and a point had been made here. Cain had invaded Peter's safest place, his home. Peter immediately placed himself between Cain and the women he loved. He asked what Cain wanted, but Cain said his own wants did not matter because his father wanted Peter. He called Peter the One, the totem of totems, and said he could feel the power of the spider moving through him like a wave. Peter understood that a fight inside the house could put Aunt May, Anna, and MJ in danger, so he allowed Cain to take him away. Once they were far enough from the house, Peter struck back. But Cain was no easy enemy. He hit hard, fought well, and had enough strength to hurt Peter badly. When Peter fell, Cain questioned how this man could be the Great Totem when he did not even seem like a real challenge. But Peter had not been beaten. He remembered Cain bursting into his home and frightening the people he loved most. That love, that anger, and that need to protect his family hit Peter with full force, and he rose again. But Peter's emotions were too much for Cain. Those bonds, that love, and Peter's will to protect his family cut through Cain's mind without Peter even meaning to do it. Cain could not handle it and ran away. But he knew one thing very clearly: Moreland would not be happy. Back at the hideout, Cain confessed that he had failed. As expected, Moreland was not pleased and called Cain a disappointment. But he did not waste much time on a long lecture because vermin had not been enough and Moreland was still hungry. And the only person near him was Cain. So, Moreland consumed his own son and killed him. But you see, Cain's death was not a major loss for Moreland, because he could create another one. In the last panel, we saw several babies kept alive in tanks, ready to become new Cains. So yeah, Moreland was not just a cannibalistic vampire, he even ate his own son. And that's where the first issue ends. What happened to the cast after the cartoon ended? The voice cast mostly kept busy. For instance, Christopher Daniel Barnes, who voiced both Peter Parker and Spider-Man, got a lot of other Spider-Man gigs. He reprised Spidey in video games like Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, where Barnes played Spider-Man Noir, and then in Spider-Man Edge of Time, he voiced Spider-Man 2099. He once again voiced Spider-Man years later in Marvel Heroes from 2013. Safe to say, he's essentially the voice of 90s Spidey. Saratoga Ballantyne, who played Mary Jane, didn't become as big a name, however. In fact, this animated series is actually her most famous role. Ed Asner, who played J. Jonah Jameson, had a long career before and after, and he was already a legend before he came on board the animated series. And even after Spider-Man, he voiced J. Jonah Jameson again in other projects and continued doing countless voice and live roles until his passing in 2021. Hank Azaria, who lent his voice to Eddie Brock and Venom, went on to do The Simpsons, The Smurfs, and tons of other animated voices. But then again, Azaria is a famous actor, and even appeared as one of Phoebe Buffay's love interests in Friends. That was all in this one, guys. If you liked the video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these awesome videos. Stay safe, and have a good one.